Hey, 7th graders, before we start reading Riddle of Penncroft Farm, Chapter 3 today, just wanted to point out on the agenda page, you probably noticed there were some spelling posters, how spelling's important, some things that were incorrectly spelled, and how it makes a difference. Reason I did that is you need to be spelling things correctly, especially on your ed puzzles, where you're following or should be following along in the book as you're listening, and then there's a question. Look back in your book. I mean, if you don't know the answer or you're not confident in the answer, look back in the book. It should be right there for you. Also, spell it correctly. If it's not spelled correctly, it's wrong. So, I don't know an example from yesterday, but today's questions will, all but one or two, be open answer where you'll have to type in the answer. Make sure it's spelled correctly. Okay, so we're going to go back to we're in chapter 3, page 32. I like to kind of refresh, hey, what was going on in the last chapter. So we've got Lars. He's still at Penncroft Farm with Aunt Cass, his mom and dad. What happened just last is he was in the wagon. Then the wagon started taking off to go down the ridge. And somebody pulled the lever to stop it. But it wasn't Lars. And he was the only one in the wagon. Interesting. Okay, so chapter 3, A Custom of Costumes. This is probably about Halloween, since Halloween's coming up. The next day I woke up feeling groggy. I'd stared up at my canopy for hours, thinking about the hand that had clutched the brake. It was not my hand. It couldn't have been. Mom knocked on my door to get me up for school, and there was no time to wonder about the day before. She hustled me along, and all too soon we were pulling up in front of my new school. Look how big the school grounds are, Mom said in an encouraging tone of voice. Did you see the obstacle course? I'll bet you'll like going through that. I gave her a scornful look. We went in, registered, and in what seemed like only a millisecond, stood reading the sign on my new classroom. Mrs. Hetrick, grade 6. Guess this is it, Lars. Want me to come in with you? Mom whispered. No, thanks, I replied, trying to sound brave. Mom gave me an anxious look. All right, then. I guess I'll run along. She took a couple of steps, then came back again. Do you remember which bus to take and where to get off? Fear was making me irritable. Yes. Bus number 8, and I get off on Seek No Further Pike. How could I forget that name? I snapped. Okay, bye, honey, Mom said uncertainly, and finally left. With a sinking feeling, I watched her walk away. With a sinking feeling, I watched her walk away. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and walked through the door to meet my new classmates. I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd expected Pennsylvania kids might look different from my Minnesota friends, but not this different. Open-mouthed, I stared at a room full of punks and pirates, ghosts and Martians. I'd forgotten it was nearly Halloween. A woman dressed like Raggedy Ann came up to me. You must be our new student, she said with a warm smile, trying to smooth orange yarn hair out of her eyes. I'm Mrs. Hetrick. Welcome to the class. Oh, and happy Halloween. She glanced at my jeans and sweatshirt with dismay. But you don't have a costume on. What a shame you didn't know we were having a party. Well, it doesn't matter. Come meet the other students. A group of kids had gathered around and were looking curiously at me. Embarrassed, I blabbed out the first thing that came into my head. Where I come from? Only kindergartners wear costumes to school. Several girls nudged each other and whispered. One tall, sandy-haired girl in a pirate costume was edging up, but stopped when she heard me. Her smile vanished. Who cares about girls anyway? I said to myself. Where are you from? One of the girls asked. Minneapolis, Minnesota, I said. My lips felt a little numb and stiff, as if I'd just had a filling. A short, fat kid in a cowboy outfit laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. Minneapolis, that hick town? My dad says that's in flyover country. The pirate girl looked at me with sympathetic brown eyes. Or eye, actually, since an eye patch covered one of them. "Oh, Eddie, don't be such a jerk," she said to the cowboy. Mrs. Hetrick raised her hand for silence. "We're going to take a little break from our party so that everyone can meet our new student. Take your regular seats so he can tell us something about himself." Grumbling, the other kids walked into the next room and sat down. Thinking I had already said more than enough, I followed the teacher to the front of the room. I just moved here from Minneapolis," I said, then stopped. I couldn't think of anything else to say. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" Mrs. Hetrick prompted. "Uh-huh," I said, feeling dumber by the second. "Well, which do you have, brothers or sisters?" "Brothers, or rather one brother. He gets to stay in Minnesota." "Flyover country," somebody whispered from the back row. Mrs. Hetrick asked me to introduce myself. Lars Olafsson. It's a Norwegian name," I added. The same someone snickered in the back row and called out, "It's Norwegian." He was a chubby kid in the cowboy suit that the pirate girl had called Eddie, and a jerk. "Edward Owens," Mrs. Hetrick started to say, but the kid interrupted her. "Edward Owens the 10th, he said, putting his stubby nose a little higher in the air. She frowned. "Edward, whatever you are, either you stop being rude or you'll spend the rest of our party parked in the office." Her threat brought a ripple of applause from the rest of the class. It made me feel a little better to know that the other kids weren't too crazy about Eddie. The applause got louder when Mrs. Hetrick told the class they could go back to the party. Most of the kids returned to the open area where the games were set up. I stayed where I was. Mrs. Hetrick took me aside. "I hope you'll have no objection to wearing a costume on Colonial Day," she said. "Colonial Day? What's that?" "It's a special event we have every year, the big finish of our unit on colonial life and the American Revolution. We have crafts and food and games from that era, and this year Pat Hargraves is going to provide some authentic music." I looked around at the other students. So my distant cousin, Aunt Cass's favorite kid, was in my class. Where was this wonderful boy, anyway? And if he was so wonderful, why hadn't he spoken up when that Eddie creep was making fun of me? The girl pirate, who had stuck around, was chattering about Colonial Day. "We've been getting ready all fall," she said enthusiastically, researching customs back to the early settlements in Pennsylvania. "William Penn and everybody. My mom's making me a long skirt like Martha Washington's, and but I don't know anything about William Penn or anybody," I broke in. "All I've been studying this year is Minnesota history, starting way back in 1830 with..." "1830?" somebody said sarcastically. That guy Eddie again. "That's all? Pennsylvania was settled way before that, in 1682. And my great-great-great-great-great, well, at least 7 greats, grandfather was one of the first guys to come over." Mrs. Hetrick looked as if she'd heard all of this before. "Yes, Eddie, we know all about your illustrious ancestors," she said frostily. "But right now I have to talk to Lars about catching up with the rest of the class." She turned to me. "Don't worry. I'll give you some books to read, and maybe you can write a special report instead of taking the tests." "That's not fair," Eddie whined. "I'm sure Lars had to take just as many tests back in Minneapolis as we've had here, Eddie. Why should he be penalized because he had to move during the school year? Now that wouldn't be fair." She went over to her desk. I glanced at Eddie and thought that moving into a classroom with a jerk like him was penalty enough. The girl pirate sat down at the desk next to me. "Aunt Cass told me you were coming, but she called you George, so I wasn't sure if you were the guy she meant," she said, putting up her eye patch. "I guess we're distant cousins or something. My name's Pat." "You're Pat Hargraves? But you're a girl!" Pat reached for a chain around her neck and toyed nervously with the ring that hung on it. "Well, yes, she started to say. "That's all I need. My only neighbor is a girl?" I muttered. I guess I muttered louder than usual because she gave me a hurt look, got up, and walked away. I felt bad. After all, it wasn't my fault Aunt Cass had bamboozled me again. Someone else sat down by me. The cowboy, unfortunately. If you live anywhere near Patty Hargraves, you must still be a hick. She's really out in the boondocks, he said. Yeah, I replied, clenching my fist in an effort to keep my temper. We live at a place called Penncroft Farm. Eddie jumped up so fast his cowboy hat fell off. You've moved to Penncroft Farm? Just wait until I tell my dad, he shouted. I wondered if he was crazy or something. Mrs. Hetrick came back with an armload of books. Eddie, she said sternly, one more outburst from you, and I'll have to tell your father a thing or two. Here, Lars, this should get you started. She handed me a stack of books. Eddie picked up his hat and left, but as he walked off, he whispered, just wait till my dad finds out. I picked up one of the books Mrs. Hetrick had given me, opened it at random, and stared blindly at the page. The rest of the day dragged by. I was so embarrassed by the stupid things I'd said and so angry at the teasing I'd received that I didn't speak to anyone. When the bell finally rang, I followed the others out to the circular drive where the buses were lined up. I found the number 8 bus and walked stiffly to the back seat. It appeared that I lived the farthest away from school because almost everyone got off the bus before I did. Only Pat Hargraves remained, sitting up in the front near the driver. I hoped she'd forgotten what I'd said to her, but the look she gave me as she climbed down from the bus said plainly she remembered it all. It was only a farther to my stop, and with a sigh of relief, I jumped down from the bus. No school until Monday, I thought happily as I started down the pike. There was still a half-mile walk to Penncroft Farm, but I dawdled along. I was in no great hurry to get home to Mom's questions about my first day at school. Besides, it was a really nice day, and I didn't want to waste it unpacking cartons. I gave a tentative kick to a good-sized stone on the shoulder of the road. It skittered nicely across the blacktop, so I kicked it down the narrow, winding road. I was so intent on what I was doing that I didn't pay attention to anything else. I suppose that's why, when I came to the old covered bridge, I didn't notice anybody standing inside until my rock disappeared under the roof of the bridge, and I looked up. Someone about my age, or a little older, stood facing the other direction. Even in the shadows, I could tell it was a girl. The ponytail and puffy sleeve made that obvious. I was determined not to get off on the wrong foot with this girl. Hi, I said slyly. I didn't see you there. Hope I didn't hit you with my rock. She turned around. There was nothing female about the face that grinned at me, or the gruff voice. Nah, you missed me by a furlong. I was astonished. This was a boy, all right, but he was wearing the weirdest clothes I'd ever seen. Besides the white shirt with billowy sleeves, he had on pants that ended at his knees, long white socks, and black shoes with big buckles. In his hand was a hat, a 3-cornered hat. Boy, Pennsylvania kids really go all out for Halloween, I thought. And do they talk funny? Furlong? I echoed, wondering if he meant far or long or what. Want to join me in a game of Huzzlecap? The boy said. Sure, I said, grateful for the invitation, even if I didn't know what it was for. We fell into step and crossed the bridge. There we stopped. The kid put his hat down on the ground and took some coins from his pocket. Huzzlecap's easy enough, he explained. You need only pitch a farthing into the tricorn. His accent sounded as foreign as his words. Ah, I said, trying to sound as if I understood. When the kid threw a coin at the 3-cornered hat, I began to get an idea of what he meant, even though the coin didn't land anywhere near the target. You, missed it by a furlong? I said. Ah, but it's a bit trickier than it looks. You try. He handed me one of the coins. I rubbed my finger over the raised letters. Farthing. The rest of the letters were too worn to read, but now I remembered what a farthing was. I also recognized the boy's clipped accent.